Viking clothing was designed to be practical and well-suited for the cold and often harsh climate of Scandinavia. However, it also reflected the Viking sense of style, social status, and craftsmanship. Here is an in-depth look at the various aspects of Viking clothing and fashion. Men's clothing, tunics and trousers. Tunics. Viking men typically wore long-sleeved tunics that extended down to the knees or thighs, forming the basic upper garment of their attire. The tunics were usually made from wool, a material prized for its durability and insulating properties, making it ideal for the cold Scandinavian climate. In warmer weather, linen was used as it is lighter and more breathable, providing comfort in hotter conditions. The construction of the tunic involved a straightforward yet practical design. The tunic was generally made from rectangular pieces of fabric, sewn together to create a loose, comfortable fit that allowed for ease of movement. The necklines varied, often round or keyhole-shaped, and could be left plain or adorned with decorative elements such as embroidery or tablet-woven bands. These bands not only added visual appeal but also reinforced the edges, preventing wear and tear. Tunics were often fastened with belts made from leather or woven fabric. The belt served multiple purposes. It cinched the tunic at the waist, creating a more fitted silhouette, and it provided a place to hang essential items such as tools, pouches, and weapons. The belts themselves could be simple or highly decorated, depending on the wearer's wealth and status. Buckles, strap ends, and belt fittings were commonly made from metal and could be intricately designed, further indicating the owner's rank. Trousers and leggings. Underneath their tunics, Viking men wore trousers or leggings, which were essential for warmth and mobility. The style and fit of these trousers varied, ranging from loose-fitting to tight, often depending on personal preference and regional influences. Loose-fitting trousers provided freedom of movement, particularly for activities such as farming, trading, or fighting. These trousers were usually gathered at the waist and secured with a drawstring or belt, and they could be tapered at the ankles to fit into boots or wrapped with leg bindings, also known as winingas or puttees. Tight-fitting trousers, on the other hand, were more streamlined and could be worn under longer tunics or with shorter ones for a more fitted appearance. These trousers might be tailored to closely follow the contours of the leg, offering both warmth and a practical advantage in combat, where excess fabric could be cumbersome. The materials used for trousers were similar to those for tunics, with wool being the predominant choice for colder weather and linen for warmer conditions. Leggings were another option, particularly useful in layered clothing systems. Made from wool or leather, leggings were typically wrapped around a leg and secured with straps or ties. They could be worn over trousers or alone, paired with a long tunic, offering flexibility in adapting to different weather conditions and activities. In summary, Viking men's clothing, particularly tunics and trousers, was designed with practicality and adaptability in mind. The use of wool and linen provided appropriate insulation and comfort for varying climates, while the incorporation of belts and other accessories allowed for the practical carrying of tools and weapons. The variations in fit and style of trousers and leggings further demonstrate the Vikings' ability to tailor their clothing to meet the demands of their active and often harsh lifestyle. Cloaks. To keep warm, Viking men wore cloaks made from wool or animal hides. The choice of material depended on the availability and the season. Wool was favored for its insulating properties and ability to retain heat even when wet, making it ideal for the cold and damp Scandinavian climate. Animal hides, often from sheep, goats, or reindeer, provided additional warmth and durability, especially during the harsh winter months. These cloaks were typically fastened at the shoulder with brooches or pins. The brooches were not just functional but also served as decorative pieces, often made from bronze, silver, or even gold. The design and material of the brooches could indicate the wearer's wealth and social standing. Some brooches were simple and utilitarian, while others were intricately designed, featuring patterns like interlacing animal figures and geometric shapes. In addition to their practical use, the cloaks could be dyed in various colors using natural dyes obtained from plants, roots, and other organic sources. Common colors included shades of red, blue, yellow, and green. The ability to wear brightly colored cloaks was often a sign of wealth, as some dyes, particularly those producing vibrant hues, were expensive and labor-intensive to produce. For instance, blue dye made from woad was highly valued and could be costly. Cloaks were also decorated with embroidery and tablet weaving. Embroidery could include simple stitches or more elaborate patterns that demonstrated the skill of the weaver. Tablet weaving, a technique used to create decorative bands, added intricate borders to the cloaks. These embellishments were not only aesthetic but also showcased the craftsmanship and artistic abilities of the Vikings. The style and length of the cloak could vary. Some were short and practical, allowing for ease of movement during work or combat, while others were longer and more elaborate, suited for ceremonial occasions or indicating high status. Cloaks for special occasions might be lined with fur or decorated with additional adornments such as metalwork or beads. In summary, Viking cloaks were essential garments for warmth and protection against the elements. They also served as significant indicators of social status and personal wealth, reflecting the wearer's resources and the craftsmanship of the Viking artisans. The combination of practical functionality and decorative artistry made cloaks a vital component of Viking attire. Women's clothing, dresses and aprons. Long dresses. Viking women wore long dresses that typically reached down to their ankles or feet. These dresses were crafted from wool or linen, depending on the season and availability of materials. Wool was the primary fabric used during colder months due to its warmth and insulation properties. Linen, on the other hand, was favored in warmer weather for its lighter, breathable qualities. The dresses were usually simple in design, featuring straight or slightly flared cuts, but they could also be adorned with decorative elements such as embroidery along the hems, cuffs, and necklines. Hangrock, apron dress. Over their long dresses, Viking women wore a distinctive apron-like garment known as the hangrock or apron dress. This garment varied in length but typically extended from the chest to below the knees. The apron dress was made from wool or linen, like the underdress, and it provided an additional layer of warmth and protection. The hangrock was usually constructed from rectangular or slightly trapezoidal pieces of fabric, sewn together at the sides. Straps and brooches. The apron dress was unique in its construction, being suspended from the shoulders by straps. These straps were often decorated with textile patterns or woven bands, adding to the garment's visual appeal. The apron dress was secured at the front with pairs of brooches, which were usually oval-shaped. These brooches, known as tortoise brooches due to their shape, were made from bronze, silver, or other metals and often featured intricate designs, including animal motifs and geometric patterns. Practical and ornamental purpose. The brooches served both practical and ornamental purposes. Practically, they held the apron dress in place and allowed for easy adjustment of the garment. Ornately, the brooches were a key element of a woman's attire, showcasing her wealth and social status. The more elaborate and finely crafted the brooches, the higher the woman's standing in society. Some brooches were also used to attach strings of beads or other jewelry, further enhancing the decorative aspect of the outfit. Additional accessories. In addition to the hangrock, Viking women often wore belts around their waists, which could be simple leather straps or elaborately decorated sashes. These belts not only helped to cinch the dress and apron dress for a better fit, but also served as a place to hang small personal items, such as keys, knives, or pouches. Regional variations. There were regional variations in the style and decoration of the hangrock. For example, in some areas, women might wear a rectangular cloak fastened with a single brooch instead of the apron dress. These variations were influenced by local resources, climate, and interactions with neighboring cultures, leading to a rich diversity in Viking women's clothing. In summary, the combination of the long dress and apron dress was a hallmark of Viking women's attire, providing both practicality and an opportunity to display personal wealth and status. The use of straps and brooches not only made the garment functional, but also allowed for individual expression through decoration and jewelry. Cloaks and shawls. Viking women's cloaks and shawls were essential elements of their wardrobe, serving both functional and decorative purposes. These garments provided necessary warmth and protection from the elements, while also acting as a canvas for displaying personal wealth and social status. Cloaks, materials, and construction. Viking women's cloaks were typically made from wool, valued for its warmth, durability, and availability. In colder regions or during harsh winters, cloaks might also be crafted from animal hides or fur, offering additional insulation against the cold. The cloaks were generally rectangular or semicircular in shape, designed to drape over the shoulders and fasten at the front. Fastenings and decorations. Cloaks were commonly fastened with brooches, pins, or clasps, which could be made from various materials such as bronze, silver, or gold, depending on the wearer's wealth. These fastenings were often elaborately decorated with intricate designs, including animal motifs, knotwork, and geometric patterns. The brooches not only secured the cloak but also served as a prominent display of wealth and craftsmanship. Embroidery and borders. Cloaks were often embellished with embroidered patterns along the edges or borders. The embroidery could include a range of designs, from simple geometric shapes to more complex scenes featuring animals or mythological figures. The level of detail and the quality of the embroidery were indicative of the wearer's social status. Wealthier women could afford cloaks with more elaborate and finely crafted decorations. Shawls and head coverings. Shawls. Shawls were another common garment worn by Viking women. Made from wool or linen, shawls were versatile and could be draped over the shoulders, wrapped around the body, or used to cover the head. Shawls provided an additional layer of warmth and were particularly useful for outdoor activities. They were also an opportunity to showcase the weaver's skill, often featuring colorful patterns and intricate designs. Head coverings. Head coverings were an important aspect of Viking women's attire, particularly for married women. These coverings could take various forms, including simple headscarves, hoods, or more elaborate headdresses. They were usually made from linen or wool and could be plain or decorated with embroidery. Head coverings served multiple purposes. They protected the hair from the elements, adhered to cultural norms of modesty, and provided another avenue for displaying personal style and status. Colors and patterns. Both cloaks and shawls were often dyed using natural dyes obtained from plants, roots, bark, and lichens. Bright and vibrant colors were particularly prized, as they were more difficult and expensive to produce. Common colors included rich reds, deep blues, vivid yellows, and earthy greens. The use of such colors and patterns not only enhanced the visual appeal of the garments, but also signified the wearer's wealth and social standing. Cultural significance. The way women wore and adorned their cloaks and shawls had cultural significance as well. Specific styles, patterns, or colors might be associated with particular regions or communities, helping to identify the wearer's origin. Additionally, the quality and decoration of these garments could reflect the wearer's family status, marital status, and even their skill or the skill of the women in their household. In conclusion, Viking women's cloaks and shawls were essential garments that combined practicality with the opportunity for personal expression and display of social status. Through their materials, construction, and decoration, these garments played a vital role in the daily lives and cultural identity of Viking women. Materials and colors. Wool and linen. The primary materials used for Viking clothing were wool and linen. Wool was the most common due to its warmth and availability. Linen, made from the flax plant, was used for lighter garments worn during the warmer months. The Vikings were adept at weaving these materials into different types of fabric, suitable for various uses. Natural dyes. Vikings were skilled in dyeing their fabrics using natural dyes obtained from plants, roots, bark, and lichens. Common colors included reds, blues, yellows, and greens. The ability to produce brightly colored clothing was a sign of wealth, as some dyes were difficult to obtain and process. Footwear and accessories. Leather shoes and boots. Footwear was typically made from leather, with different styles for men and women. Men often wore ankle boots, while women might wear shoes or boots that extended higher up the leg. The shoes were usually fastened with toggles or laces. Jewelry. Jewelry was a significant aspect of Viking fashion and a clear indicator of social status. Both men and women wore brooches, necklaces, arm rings, and finger rings. The materials for these items ranged from simple bronze to precious metals like silver and gold. Jewelry often featured intricate designs, including animal motifs and geometric patterns. Social status and clothing. Indicators of wealth. Clothing and accessories were not just functional but also a means of displaying wealth and status. Wealthier Vikings could afford more elaborate garments, made from finer materials and adorned with detailed embroidery and costly dyes. Jewelry was particularly important in signifying one's rank and wealth, with high-ranking individuals wearing more and more elaborate pieces. Regional variations. There were regional variations in Viking clothing styles, influenced by local resources, climate, and interactions with other cultures. For example, Vikings in the British Isles might incorporate elements from Anglo-Saxon or Celtic fashion, while those in Eastern Europe might adopt styles seen in Slavic regions. In conclusion, Viking clothing was a blend of practicality and style, designed to provide warmth and protection while also allowing individuals to express their identity and social standing. Through their use of materials, colors, and decorative elements, the Vikings created a distinctive and functional wardrobe that suited their needs and reflected their culture. Subscribe to our channel for more inspiring content about the Norse civilization.